it's not necessarily about being vulnerable. I think it's about being creative. I think it's more about just being open to the fact that you have more experiences to share than you think. There's a lot going on in your life as an executive that's more than just the work. Bring people into that a little bit. To me, that's vulnerability too.
Why did I become an executive coach? I saw lots of great people fail to get ahead at work, while their much less talented peers blew right past them. That made me furious, but also curious. What were great people getting wrong? It came down to helping them re-examine what drove success, and then helping them make critical shifts, one hard truth at a time.
Feel like you're doing everything you were told, but you're not moving ahead at work nor having the impact you seek? Then welcome to 97% Effective with Michael Winderoth, where we skip feel-good, happy talk and engage experts in pointed conversations about what it really takes to move the needle at work and your career. So if you feel stalled or frustrated, or seek that extra edge as you move to the next level, then look no further. This is the Hard Truths Playbook you never got.
Hi, I'm Michael Winderoth, and you're listening to 97% Effective. The C-suite, full of power, politics, and intrigue, like we see in the popular TV series Suits, Succession, or Borgen. How do you rise there, survive there, and thrive there? Do well for yourself, but also produce superior business results and strategic outcomes. There is a lot of storytelling of what goes on there, and frankly, actually not a lot of hard talk about this world. So I'm excited to have as my guest today a trusted advisor, executive coach to Fortune 50 executives, Nihar Chhaya. Nihar's clients open up to him about their challenges, fears, opportunities in ways they often can't with those around them. And they do so, of course, under immense pressure, under the immense spotlight. Stakes are incredibly high, as we know, in Fortune 50 companies. And they're there to make an impact and often do that when it's not totally under their control. So we're going to peek under the hood of what most helps top executives and try to do that in a thoughtful and clinical way. A Wharton, Columbia, and Georgetown trained leadership expert, Nihar Chhaya is president of PartnerExec, which helps leaders, very simple, master influence. Nihar is a regular and I would say pretty prolific contributor from reading his content on Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and Fast Company. He's also a master certified coach by the ICF, the International Coaching Federation, and selected as a Marshall Goldsmith 100 coaches, two of the top markers for excellence in our field of coaching. Nihar is based in Dallas, Texas, but should not forget his roots growing up in the Northeast, South Jersey to be precise. That's coming from me, a guy who grew up outside of Philly. Nihar, first, thank you for publishing such thoughtful articles on leadership and being a personal inspiration for me. I've learned a lot from you and at very precise moments appreciated your encouragement and tips in my journey to be a writer and as a better coach. Welcome to 97% Effective.
Thank you so much, Michael. It is such a pleasure to be with you. I really appreciate the chance for us to have this conversation, and I've been a big fan of your work, and in particular your latest book. So really excited about our talk today.
Thank you. I'm going to start here and have you finish a phrase, okay? And that starts with the C-suite is like, and as I said in my intro, a bit tongue-in-cheek, but there is a lot of drama and politics presented in popular TV shows. But it's true. You do, as a coach, have a unique window into what's going on and see inside it. So if you did have to pick a series or a movie or something for popular culture that best represents the environment in the C-suite and people you work with, what would it be? What would it be?
Well, it's certainly hard to pick one, and it's funny because one thing that you might not know about me is I'm a big movie buff, and Oscars week is this weekend, which is a show that I love to watch every year. One movie that I think is nominated is Everything Everywhere All at Once, and the title alone right there to me is like very similar to what C-suite executives are dealing with. It's just a constant barrage of things coming their way every day. And then I think, another movie that I think probably captures it better though is Top Gun Maverick, where I'd say that there's a lot of egos. Everybody kind of is at top of their game because they got to the C-suite. But there's really no way that the mission gets completed without that shared sacrifice. And so all the executives I work with, they might have their own individual career path that they worry about, but they know also that to really succeed together, it becomes that high stakes situation. And so there's one Tom Cruise, but there's also a lot of folks in that plane and those other planes helping him.
So I didn't know you were a movie buff, so that was a great question because I think those really tap into some central themes that we're going to talk about here. And you alluded to this, but client profile and what we would call in coaching as kind of the presenting issue. What is the kind of typical profile, or is there a most common presenting issue when your clients come to you and you start working?
Yeah, I think the common presenting issue is this is a leader that generally wants to succeed at scale. And so, you're moving up from to your first VP role, your first SVP, or your first C-suite and CEO role. As you move up, you really are measured more by your impact on other people and driving results through others as opposed to doing it yourself. And so the presenting need would be how do we help them make sure that they're not derailing in that process? But I think on a more conceptual level, what really happens is that they reached a point where they can't think their way out of problems anymore. So logic doesn't work. If it's more of the nebulous interpersonal dynamics that really come into play with as you write about influence and power. But even on an intrapersonal level, things like self-doubt and managing my own fears and my vulnerabilities and things like that. But yeah, the general presenting issue would be around, achieving that kind of leadership at scale.
And, the other thing that really struck me, I cannot remember who told me this quote, and it was probably more eloquently, is that often as teachers or coaches, you need to address what they want, especially if they're coming with a present issue, but you often need to give them what they need. And so still at a high level, before we dive into some of those topics, you did talk about the presenting issue you typically see. When you do boil it down, is that what they ended up needing or where you end up arriving on your journey working with them?
No, I mein, in fact, there's an interesting saying that I oftentimes tell my clients that, coaching is the one business where the customer isn't always right. So I'm not doing my job if I'm telling you kind of all the things you want to hear, or you could read them in a book. In fact, what the underlying need typically is around recognizing their blind spots. And it's almost impossible for them to do that themselves. Now, they might have people around them that give them feedback and things of that nature, but the willingness to actually take that insight and do something with it is a whole different story. And a lot of people might even have the interest and the motivation to do that, but they don't have the time. So the underlying need typically is that, hey, I don't know how people see me. And it might be working for me, but it's not working for other people. And now we need to start getting deeper into what's the limitation there.
Yeah, so it really strikes me, right? For you to succeed and your clients, it's a high stakes situation. There has to be a willingness to take in some of that. I mean, and how do you screen for that? Because you're only as successful as your coachees are. And if they're not coachable or willing to hear that, you're never going to get anywhere. How do you look for that?
Well, I think part of it is being very clear on who I can help and who I can't help. So I certainly don't work with people where I feel as if they're looking for the answers from me or they're not taking ownership. And we're very clear in the beginning of the coaching contract. That's something that I like about ICF. They talk a lot about how you need to contract with your coachee all the time about what are we really trying to achieve here. And, we're not trying to boil the ocean. We're trying to see that if there's a gap between point A and point B where you want to be, and that you're willing to take that ownership, because we look at the coachee as naturally resourceful and whole and capable on their own, as opposed to looking for me or looking for somebody else to rescue them, if you will. Right. But I think you make a good point also about the coachability. Sometimes that shows up later. Like in the beginning, a lot of clients will be really excited about getting learning and engaging in the partnership. And then if I'm observing that they're starting to lose a little bit of motivation or the accountability, I'll call that out. And that actually might be something we explore further as, okay, what's behind that? What's going on there? And that provides another rich area for us to explore.
Yeah, very, very well said. I mean, that is really the art and what makes coaching effective that you've broken down there. To go deeper on, 3 topics that I've really noticed come through strongly in your writing. You have tons of articles, and I'm going to put a bunch of those in the show notes, but I wanted to hear and talk to you about, is there a top interpersonal skill that you find, because you've been coaching lots of executives for years, that doesn't get enough attention but should, and particularly in this upper level that you would call out and just share a little bit about?
Yeah, I would say that, the one skill that tends to come up all the time is just not being able to take criticism and effectively, and really, from what I mean by that is both in terms of managing it internally, but also sending the message back to the people around them that, they can continue to give me criticism and I'll be okay. What we tend to see in the coaching relationship, because there's so much feedback being given to them from, whether it's from me or from their 360 or from other people they work with, it can be very humbling, and in the other extreme, it can be demoralizing, because in many ways it's like, like anybody else, nobody likes to really be told that they're not doing well or they're failing, or even that there's certain things that they might have intended to do but were misunderstood. And what happens, I think it's human nature that leaders, myself, other people, we all kind of find a way to cope with that in different ways. So you might find a leader that's defensive. They might deflect. They might pretend like everything's fine. They might project their own kind of insecurities, or they might just really get frustrated and start, deciding to retaliate in their own passive aggressive or aggressive ways. And so I think the top skill for C-suite executives that I've worked with, not all of them struggle with this, but it really does come down to being able to take criticism in a way that is constructive for themselves, to learn that it's part of the natural way that humans interact, that there's not going to, going back to the blind spots, there's going to be a natural blind spot you're going to have because you can't see how other people perceive you. And then being able to recognize and take ownership for that like, I don't have to agree with the criticism, but I'm going to own the fact that I had something to contribute to your perception. Some little portion. Doesn't have to be the full thing. Of course, people that criticize you might have their own insecurities that they're dealing with, but there's something in the way we interact that's causing that. And so then I'll say, okay, this is how the behavior, I would say, how can you change your behavior in a way that's better aligning your intentions with their perceptions? But when you wince at the criticism, or Michael, for instance, I'll have a lot of executives that will say, I want you to give me the feedback. I want you to tell me what I'm doing wrong, but then you tell them and all of a sudden they're not really responding in a way that's supportive. Nobody's going to come back to you and tell you, they're going to prefer not to be around you at that point. And that's where it's strategically not even a good idea to be able to be to separate yourself from that, because nobody's going to really tell you what they really need to tell you for you to be successful.
And when you encounter that, right? So others in the organization may shy away, start feeding you different information, telling you what you want to hear. But you as a coach, I mean, your job is to help them here. Is there every individual, of course, is different, but yeah. I know you've got some secret sauce in how you help them kind of reframe that. You mentioned getting them to think objectively about it, and it's not about them, it's about the impact. But any pieces of wisdom there?
Well, I think the first thing that I try to do is create a very non-judgmental space for us. So, whether that's telling them explicitly, but really showing them. And what I mean by that is starting by meeting them where they are. In other words, making sure that I'm not leading with the message because I'm dying to get my point across, or I need them to change because of me. I start simply by even asking them, like, this happened. How do you think you did? What do you think was the impact? I'm asking them to observe the situation with me. So we're on the same side of the table here. We're not antagonizing each other. I would even encourage them to do that with their direct reports or their colleagues as well.
Yeah.
When you're able to look at the movie together, then you might start asking exploratory questions like, okay, what do you think worked well? And then, what could you do differently if you wanted a different outcome? And so having those questions from a place of we're exploring this as opposed to this is right or this is wrong. Because Michael, as a coach, like most things that we help them work on, there is a counter side to it. Like there's a valid case to be made to be the opposite of that in some situations. If a leader, for instance, is moving really fast, and he's getting feedback like, you need to slow down. There's a valid case sometimes to make sure that they're not being too slow, and so everything can be somewhat debatable. And I think that's important to create that environment with them to say, I'm not looking at this as a binary situation that you need to change and fix. This is really about us being divergent thinkers and thinking about, are we even solving the right problem here, as opposed to looking for the right answer, which usually doesn't exist.
And to provide this, kind of being on the same side of the table, I love the way you said that, is in getting some of the feedback. And I wanted to ask you this question on, there are many ways to collect feedback, right? There's assessment mechanism, 360, shadowing, observation, and everything seems to have a bias, a potential, right? People are not going to share. They're going to tell you things they want to hear. They may say things they don't like, but it's actually good for them. And how do you pull out the best feedback? Because you're partly in charge of that process.
Right.
And I think this is important for people to hear, because you want to get feedback, and how do you do that in a way that you're getting rich, useful information?
Right. Well, a few things. So, and it's funny you mentioned this because just this morning I was doing some 360 interviews for some clients. A few things. One, I think it does depend on the interviewee and their comfort with sharing information. I had an interview with someone recently where they felt really unclear about what to say. And so they were almost saying almost asking me to put words in their mouth about it. And I didn't want to do that. So I want to make sure that this is pulling from them completely. So I really do ask very high level questions and very kind of open, abstract ones. I don't say, are they good or bad at this skill? I just say, how would you characterize this person? What's your observations in general of them as a leader and a collaborator? And then we just kind of take it from there, because everybody's starting from a different place in terms of their perspective. I just want to get their own kind of movie that the picture that they're painting when they see this person. And then I will start asking them about, okay, what do you think is working well as it relates to the success criteria for them? So again, we don't really want to think about whether this person likes or doesn't like this person. It's more around, are they effective with respect to a very objective criteria in their role? And that might be, their business results, or if you're a function in the company, it might be how well you're working with the businesses. And I'll ask them, okay, then let's look at certain aspects of leadership, their communication skills, their interpersonal sensitivities, their speed at which they work. All those things, what would you say are their strengths? Are they opportunities to grow? And then I would just say, given what we know about them and your work with them, what would you say are their strengths? What would you say are some opportunities to grow? And then if I'm getting a sense that they're not really touching the surface, what I'll usually ask is I'll say, okay, when they operate in this way, what impact do you think that has on people? Because again, what I'm also interested in is not so much whether they are doing what I think is great or what the interviewee thinks is great. I want to know what impact their general behavior has on people around them, because it might then make people feel like, oh, they love it. They're actually more engaged and motivated. Or, this person changes their mind so much that it creates havoc for their team. All those things are interesting insights. And again, we're not looking for scoring them per se, because this coaching that we do is more around, behavioral development related to both their values and both success criteria of their company. So, but it's more like thematic, and I think that generally makes it we're able to kind of screen out kind of what the feedback, what's useful and what's not useful.
Yeah, the power of asking these questions, and you alluded to it. I mean, having this as part of your toolkit as a leader, working with your team and others, and so many people don't do that. So you just gave a mini masterclass there on some great ways to how you ask the question and how you frame it. There's this huge theme in your writing of competing and collaborating, right? We're kind of
Yeah.
doing both at the same time. And you've written on, how to harness envy, what if someone's outshining you, how to collaborate with people you don't always see eye to eye with. And so it kind of, you've got to be thinking of both of these at the same time, right? Because you got to collaborate to get stuff done. You don't want to also kind of get walked over. So I'm just some of your reflections on this competition versus collaboration, this competition versus collaboration environment that you sit in organizations, particularly the further you go up.
I'm very fascinated by organizational politics. I think obviously that's a big part of what you work on with Power. I think that with the people that I coach, I wouldn't say that people necessarily present with the idea that like I'm struggling with competition or I'm struggling with collaborating, but it generally shows up later because in that dilemma surfaces a lot of undesirable traits, I think, that they might be going through. So for instance, somebody might not be naturally a jealous or competitive person, but all of a sudden they're like, wow, why am I so consumed by this issue? Because I want this so badly. And like I was working with a client who is actually a Buddhist, and he's a very devout practicing Buddhist, and he could feel that in the corporate world, it was going against all the things he was trying to honor in his practice, which was to say, I'm actually supposed to be okay with the equanimity of people, of things around me, as opposed to falling into this trap, and knowing it's a trap. But at the same time, he had ambition, and like all of us do. So I write about this from the perspective of how can you kind of befriend the natural impulses that people have with respect to envy or jealousy, and understand that it's just part of who we are. We're taught to be ashamed of wanting and coveting. It's in the history of time, right? That it's a seven deadly sins and things like that. But the reality is, instead of making it a bad thing, understand that comparison is just going to be always there. It's how we benchmark ourselves in terms of what we're doing in our life, in our work. It's a useful exercise too to gather information. So I think being competitive is actually a good thing because you're in the game, but you also want to be able to balance that with respect to not doing it at the expense of other things that make you fulfilled in life. Like so many executives I work with, it's not until they've been working for 15, 20 years at maximum capacity that they realize, man, like my marriage is terrible, or I really didn't spend any time with my kids, and I don't know how to say no because I know that I want to be able to take vacation with my kids, but I haven't said no to my boss and things like that. And I think ultimately that's where it's an interesting topic, because competition, you don't want to stop being competitive at work, but you also want to make sure you're being attentive to all the other aspects of your life.
Yeah, I love how you lay that out. And it's this question, right? As coaches, particularly when there's certain things, this example with the client who's Buddhist, where there are things that kind of run against their natural inclinations, worldview, mental models. And what do you find most effective? Because you need to move them quickly, right? It's
Yeah.
not like therapy where we can sit here and talk for 10 sessions.
Right.
You're often expected, or they're often expected, to shift some behaviors quickly. There's no shortcuts. We know there's no silver bullets, but clearly you find certain things may be more effective. What helps coach people around that?
Well, I think it's again getting back in touch with what's important to them. So for instance, and it's a very simple question, but it's like, how's that working for you? So you're getting consumed by this thing, right? How is that working for you? And really exploring that, yes, it might feel like I need to be. So many people who are ambitious and I think successful, unfortunately, their mind has been conditioned to believe that if they continue to be ambitious and competitive, only then can they be successful because it worked for them, right? But until you have a coach, you're not really having the kind of the mirror put to you to say, but is it really working for you? Because now you're becoming somebody you don't even like, And so we go back to thinking about what are the goals and the values. Now, for instance, let's say you want to become a CEO, and you are dead set on that's what I want to be, good. There are lots of creative ways and constructive ways to get there. If you are finding yourself getting into a place of super competitiveness, or what I oftentimes see, people kind of start working with hubris. They're not competitive in the sense that they don't necessarily have envy of their colleagues or Schadenfreude about trying to see them fail, as much as they try to stay in their own lane. And they kind of withhold information, or they don't really see the opportunity of actually bringing people along with them. And that is a mistake, because the truth is, when you become CEO, all the people that you didn't bring with you are not going to want to work for you. So you have to have a little bit of a strategic point of view here. Be careful what you wish for. Yeah. When you get the job, you won't have the followership, right? So working with peers, working well across your lateral level divisions and colleagues is so critical. And what's really cool about this is, when you change your perspective from one of competing against them to collaborating and really seeing how we can build something together, it actually can minimize that feeling of feeling left behind, or feeling competitive, or the envy, or whatever. Because again, I think on a human level, we're all looking to belong in some way. Yeah. We're looking to belong while also standing out.
Right.
And so you find that balance, right? But it's like, don't stand out too much, in which case you're lonely, and don't necessarily, try to be in groupthink where you feel like your ambition is being stifled. It's a little bit of a balance.
Yeah, it's what you said earlier of avoiding sometimes the binary. You've got to be one or the other, and finding
exactly.
that middle ground, which leads me to that second area around communication. Mm-hmm. And this part around getting feedback is so central, and kind of recognizing your blind spots, your hidden strengths. So hard, because yes, there's politics and things and perception going on around you. Now, of course, yes, you can get a coach. A coach can help. There's now internal coaches and external coaches. But if we just take this for a minute of what people can do just on an ongoing basis, and if we start with kind of leaders, again, there's a power dynamic, right? So people below you, or even peers, may be feeding you certain things, may have fear. I mean, how does a leader on an ongoing basis, we want kind of that feedback loop going, but rich and useful feedback. What do people need to do so they get that on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, it's a great question. I often find that leadership as you move up is lonely at the top, and even more so when people aren't telling you the truth, or telling you what they're really feeling. And that could become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then it's like, well, if nobody's saying anything, then I guess I'm doing fine, right? But then all of a sudden you realize, wow, people are leaving the company, or what other issues that get in the way of your success. I think the first thing that I always tell leaders is, you got to make it safe for them to give you feedback, And I'm not talking about just like, hey, come to my office, I have an open door policy. I'm talking about really explaining to them that you understand that we all have a shared humanity here. That them getting feedback from you as a leader is not something unfamiliar to my client. He or she is getting it from their boss too. It's a painful exercise. So I know that it's painful, but I want to lean into that, because I know that I can't succeed without you. And I think really having that, some might say vulnerability. I would actually say it's just being honest. It's telling them that the nature of my job is such that I can't do this without you, and I need to know what you're thinking about me. And also, it's not really even a personal thing about whether you like me or not. It's actually around, I need to get as much insight as possible on how you're perceiving me, and to see whether that's in line with what my intentions are. Because so many times we'll see things where a leader is not liked because of a certain personality trait, but actually their intention was a good one. It was like, I really wanted to help this person, but they took it the wrong way, So it's not really about necessarily this person is failing as a leader. It's actually these communications are being crossed. These channels are being crossed. There's a miscommunication there, and there's a misperception of their intention. So I would say to a leader, to really create that safety, is explaining to them kind of why this is necessary for us to have this dialogue, And then showing accountability, showing ownership, right? So it's not enough to say, "Oh, let me know what you think." Because here's the thing: if I ask you,
Right.
Michael, like, Michael, what do you think about me as a leader? And then I never do anything about it. One, that'll kind of frustrate you probably. But number two, you might even wonder, like, what are you doing with that information?
Yeah.
Because did I say the wrong thing? Because he hasn't even responded to me since then. And that's where you have to show that respect to people. That, like, even when I do a 360 for folks that is, I'm talking to them anonymously, I tell my leaders, you got to send a thank you note to them. They took time out of their schedule to talk to me. They didn't have to do that, you know? And so people will say feedback is a gift. The truth is that actually these folks are really going out of their way and out of their comfort zone to tell you something that maybe they don't know if you're going to take it okay. You got to make it safe for them by reminding them that I'm really going to put in the work here in return for your candor and honesty.
You've been listening to 97% Effective with your host, Executive Coach Michael Winderoth. If this interview is making you think, make sure to share it with a friend. Now, back to our interview.
And you touch on sharing vulnerability. That word, there's a lot of fear out there, right, of leaders of doing that. We may be getting better. You can share your thoughts on that. But what helps people get over that? Because there is this, the leader needs to look strong, at least stereotypically. I think we're getting better at this. We're having more conversations. But is there a way to kind of ease into this, or you just have to do it?
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge, I think, to be vulnerable and also to be competent and show that you can do the job. In fact, I always go back to this. I think it's a phenomenon called the pratfall effect, which is that if let's say that you're on stage and you fall, what it's called the pratfall, so you fall, but let's say you make a mistake and it's embarrassing. The studies show that basically if they see you as competent, that can actually make you more likable.
Yeah.
If you're not competent, then it can be embarrassing, and probably rightfully so, because they look at you as like, wow, this person doesn't have it together. And what's interesting about that concept is that you actually stand to gain by showing some mistakes, even on purpose, really. Mm-hmm. Because again, you're not going to have that connection with people unless they're able to see you as a human, really. But again, you want to do that after you developed a little bit of awareness that you're competent, so that people can trust that you're not just, really unserious, if you will. But I oftentimes will tell leaders, like, being vulnerable, I think, so I'm a feeler, like I'm an INFP on the Myers-Briggs. Some people might not agree with the Myers-Briggs. I know Adam Grant just wrote another article about how he hates it. That's fine. But I will say that I know for a fact that my preference is more on the F, which is a feeler, than the thinker. And what that simply means is that it's true that when I make decisions or make calculations in my life, I definitely go first to how does it impact people first, as opposed to kind of does it make logical sense. And what that means is that it might be a little bit easier for me to be quote unquote vulnerable because I'm kind of thinking like that all the time. I have my own self-doubts and I'm pretty comfortable sharing that in certain settings, whereas somebody else might be really against that. But even people who don't want to share those things, it's not necessarily about being vulnerable. I think it's about being creative. I think it's more about just being open to the fact that you have more experiences to share than you think. You don't have to make every conversation about the review, the slides that we're going to review in the business process meeting. You could share a little bit about how you were scared this morning because something happened in your family. I don't want to say that you should bring that up, but if it happened, right, sharing it. But my point is that, like, there's a lot going on in your life as an executive that's more than just the work. Bring people into that a little bit. To me, that's vulnerability too. It's just being more open and honest about, like, your real life, because we're more well-rounded human beings, I think, than we probably think we are at work.
Yeah, I often feel we get stuck on words, right? Vulnerability, authenticity, mm-hmm. and then they start to lose their meaning. And yes. You walking through this kind of expands, right, how you think about that, or what the purpose of it is. You talk a lot about intentionality, means strategic, and I find that really, really helpful. We talked about getting feedback. Mm-hmm. The other part, which you write a lot, is, and I love this piece you have around tension-free feedback because we
Right.
don't like giving it. Leaders who are in the top need to, right? They need to demand, influence, excellence, but you don't want to alienate your people, right? To your points
Yep.
you made earlier. So without going into this extensively, keys to help people deliver feedback that's productive and very effective.
Well, so part of it, I think, is what I mentioned earlier around the idea of let's be on the same side of the table here, and make it an interactive exercise in the sense that nobody wants to hear feedback in a monologue. Like as if I'm just going to deliver this and then see you later, get back to work. It really has to be an exploratory conversation. But I will say there's a few things that I think leaders don't do well that I think they could do better at. One is being very vague about what the success looks like for that leader, for that person. When you start kind of throwing around like, oh, I've been hearing that you've been doing this and so told me you did that, like it's not helpful. It's just gossip really. And if it's helpful feedback, it'll be tied to some kind of a calibrated or agreed upon, version of success for both of you. That's what somebody really wants to hear because it's like, okay, so what? What does it really mean that this person doesn't like me? Why should I care about that? Everybody wants to hear just, I think human nature is such, we want to know why is this important? So really helping them understand the why. And as a leader, it's important also to get past your own insecurities about what if this person doesn't take it the right way, or what if they don't do what I want? And it really is not going to be helpful if you're always thinking with your own agenda. I always, like I said in that piece in Fast Company, I said, feedback is only as good as it lands. You could give them all types of feedback, good and bad, and they won't do anything with it unless they really accept it. And so the job really for the leader is to make sure that they're delivering it in a way that shifts the mindset of that person, that shifts behavior. And the only way to really do that is to get them to be an active participant in deciding that. And so you start with, how does this really tie to what you want? How does this really tie to what you need to do to be successful? Do you even want to be successful in this particular area? It's totally your call if you don't want to work on it. But this is insight that I'm sharing with you that can help us decide whether this is something you need to start leaning into, or maybe just deciding to be honest about it and say, I can't work on it.
Yeah, this is drawing from all the skills of an excellent coach and
Yeah.
applying those as you say those, that really stands out. And I mean, a last question on this, because you also brought up the vague feedback. And this is one of the things that always my clients and those I see who are rising, and I get this, I hear it a lot on 360s that I do for my clients. Executive presence. So they don't look like a leader, right? You get this very vague piece, and executive presence, which there's tons of definitions out there. There's a stereotype, which often resembles the dominant culture in organizations. And it is, so I feel like I have to dig into, well, what does that mean?
Right.
What do you mean by that, to get more specifics? But I think this is a very frustrating area for particularly underrepresented groups who maybe don't look like the current mold of what, our stereotypical, let's just call it, leadership as a masculinity contest in certain places, but very dominant, decisive, show gravitas. How do you define it or focus on building it with your clients?
Yeah, it's such a big term. And, I'm just like we talked about vulnerability and other topics, authenticity that get thrown around a lot. I oftentimes will tell my clients, we need to get very clear on what this means. And I do think that defining that from two lenses is very important. One is, what does it mean to them? And what does it mean to the culture or the organization around them, the stakeholders around them? Because, I can tell you, like, I work with startups and, companies where if you wore a suit, you get laughed at, and I work at companies where if you wear jeans, it's not working. It's not acceptable. And of course, things have changed even since we started our careers, where you would actually wear a blazer and things like that. I remember for one time I coached a company. As you and I both are from the East Coast, and when I moved to Texas, I was coaching in an oil and gas company, and they told me I was way overdressed. You look like a consultant. You got to stop wearing this suit here, and it's a real deal, real thing. And so being aware of kind of what the general wardrobe and that kind of thing is very important. That's a big part of executive presence too, I think. But then you can think about the idea of also what impact do you want to have in terms of presence with people and with the audience that you're trying to influence. And even then you can say there's a subset there. We're talking about executive presence when you're one-on-one or one-on group. And then there's executive presence when you're on the big stage, and I would say for me, it's always very important to think about presence. The word presence really is important here. Are you being present to the people you're trying to communicate with? And, a lot of times you'll find people who think they're really great at speaking, but they're kind of speaking at people. They're not really speaking to them.
Yeah.
And that awareness of what I'm doing, how I'm coming across, and how I'm landing with people, if you don't have that awareness, you'll generally fall into the same old habits that you've always done, which could work at half the time. But the other half, people are lost, and they're just kind of zoning out.
Yeah, this piece around awareness, really, really well stated. So Nihar, I loved a piece on your website, which is how to make a coach your secret weapon. And I thought this was a really, it's another powerful tool of how we improve and get better. And you touched on this at the very beginning as we're coming to the end here about, being aware of what you don't know or what you're not seeing. And so that's clearly one piece of it. But for those out there who are thinking about what can executive coach do for me, because the field is now proliferating with coaches. And, particularly as you're at the upper levels where the stakes are higher, I mean, what are some of the things people should be thinking about to really make coaching effective for them as they're trying to make more impact or be more effective at work?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is to remember that coaching is an investment in yourself. It's not really a product or service that you're going to buy and put on the shelf. It's about as good as what you put into it. And so I think the first question is usually to be really clear on, do you really want to have a partner in your journey? As opposed to just saying, hey, I'll wing it. I'll figure it out myself, which is perfectly valid. And look, I work with clients where sometimes we will work for a year and then we'll stop and then we'll work again. I do think it's just like any kind of helping profession, you want to know what you're kind of needing at that moment. And again, coaching, I think, is an exploratory service. So you don't have to have it all figured out now. But I think usually there's some kind of a gap between how I feel, where I am in my life or my work, and where I want to be. I think that with respect to making sure that you're maximizing that coaching relationship and really getting the most out of a coach, one is to really be okay with the fact that this is about getting you better. So one of the quotes I have in that piece is, you don't have to be sick to get better. Which is by, I think, Wayne Dyer, who I really enjoyed his writing before he died. And, the idea here is that so much of what we, goes back to the criticism idea. So much of, I think, what we're conditioned to believe is that if I need a coach, I'm not doing well. And it's not true. It's like going to your doctor. It's preventative. You're getting somebody to help you look at things that you can't possibly know yourself. There's no way that you can know how this new leadership team that you just inherited after you got promoted to an SVP role, there's no way you can know what they think about you when you leave that room. It's impossible. And yet we think that we will. We'll think oh, who cares? They'll figure it out. And if I don't like them, then I'll get rid of them. I mean, all types of things we say in our minds about, what we can do to cope with the possibility that we don't get along or work well together. It doesn't have to be that way. You really could have a coach to help you think about both your limitations or your avoidances, and also learn key techniques and skills that I think anybody can benefit from in terms of interpersonal connection. So that's where I would say, take off the stigma about coaching. It's not necessary anymore. We all are investing in ourselves, and really having somebody that you trust and can also tell you the honest truth can be a super valuable weapon for you as you succeed.
Nihar, this has been everything that I thought it would be in the interview. And as we come to an end, I don't normally do this, but when I get a chance to be with someone like you, I want to just do a lightning round here, if we could close with
Okay.
that, okay? So we don't need to overthink it. They can be short answers. Some personal, some I think we'll share some insights into you here. First, Philadelphia Eagles, Dallas Cowboys, or football? Don't you mean Real Madrid?
Well, Philadelphia Eagles for sure. So I live in Dallas, but I still consider myself an East Coaster. And actually, the Eagles were, I always remember this because my seventh birthday, 1981, January 25th, that was the first time they got to the Super Bowl. They lost to the Raiders, but I remember that very clearly because I was young and we were in Philly and people were going nuts.
We were watching it at the same time. And then if you're
Really?
like me, 2018, when they beat the Patriots, you've got that recorded and you turn it on every once in a while.
Yeah.
That's the greatest game ever. Okay. Hoagies, subs, cheesesteak, Taylor ham, egg and cheese sandwich, or barbecue and Tex-Mex?
Hoagies.
Hoagies.
Hoagies for sure.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Just one, because you are incredibly prolific with what you write and who you reflect on. So I'm curious, who's been the biggest influence, on your thinking as a coach and a thought leader?
Wow. I read so much that I can't honestly say that the latest thing that I'm reading isn't the most important thing.
Right. Recency bias.
Yeah, exactly. I do think that one thing I love to do is connect ideas,
Yeah.
and so patterns that I'm seeing through different things. So as I mentioned, I'm a movie buff. I love pop culture. I love to learn about how art and business kind of intersect. And so, for instance, like I wrote some articles last year about leadership lessons from like a movie that George Clooney and Ben Affleck were in, The Tender Bar. I wrote an article about lessons from Will Smith's bio, which was before the slap last year, but it was a lot of cool things. And so the influence I think from that I've gotten in my work, I don't know where I got it from in one place, but I do think that I've learned a lot about just following your interests and following your excitement, because it can kind of bring it back from a lot of different domains into your given work, whether you're a coach or even whether you're a lawyer or whether you're a doctor or whatever it might be.
Yeah. This piece about following your interest, and we have both been heavily influenced by Dory Clark, and that's how we met. She is absolutely amazing. And one of her pieces of advice, and I remember this is a piece I saw you were talking with her, she really recommends produce content, write, things about that come to you that you feel some heat around, and your niche or your special point of view / superpower will start to emerge. I'm curious because you've really been prolific writing. You clearly bring in and make connections, pieces from clients, real situations you can tell. What's kind of emerged for you or been surprising of when you put those pieces out there?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I've definitely learned is process over outcomes is so important. Really understanding that, and I love the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. He talks a lot about that, where if you're going to be a writer, for instance, an amateur writer would wait till they're inspired to write. A professional writer is writing, right? They're going to write because that's their job. Just throw this out there. One I always tell this to my clients. Lorne Michaels, who produced Saturday Night Live, for over 40 years, every Saturday, right? They create a live show from scratch on that Monday, from ideas all the way to sets and everything, and the actual actors, et cetera. And he was once asked, how do you know when you're ready to go on? And he's like, we're never ready. We go on because it's 11:30 on Saturday night. And that idea really changed my perspective on productivity and the idea of getting things done. Like Seth Godin talks a lot about shipping stuff. And so I've been actually, even for myself, I'm trying to work on really having more of a cadence in my writing and really not falling in love with the idea that I need to have the best idea. Because the other thing I was going to say, Michael, I don't know if you would agree with this, but I find that when I sit down to write, more ideas start emerging than actually when I don't write, which is I'm waiting for that perfect inspiration, which may or may not come.
Yeah, it's that action starts to drive insight. Action
Yes.
starts to help you see connections, and then you want to capture them. But you're really good at producing them. If you don't have a cadence, you've fooled me there. And the last one
I
is.
appreciate you saying that.
And the last one is we're recording this before the Oscars, so. Best picture, best actor, who you want to make a prediction, or who should be? That's probably not going to get it, right? There's always those. I'm curious because you do follow a lot. Anything you want to make a prediction on?
Yeah, I will say I can't cover all of them, but what I will say is the best actress race was really interesting to me because I saw this movie Tar, which Cate Blanchett was in, which was phenomenal. I thought she was great. I really love her. But then there was this whole story around how this woman, Andrea Riseborough, was in this movie that had a really low budget, like $25,000, not budget revenue. Nobody even saw it. But her friends, who are many of these best actresses, Charlize Theron, Kate Winslet, they all did a campaign on Twitter to help her because the movie was so good. And I think it's called From Leslie. I saw it, and I was blown away. So I actually think that she should win, but we'll see if that happens in terms of the controversy. So I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, this will probably air after, so we'll go back and look at it.
That's right.
Nihar, best way for people to reach you, see your work with you?
Yeah, anybody can email me if they want. I'm simple. It's nihar@partnerexec.com. My website is partnerexec.com. Please feel free to visit there. You can also get in touch if you want. And then LinkedIn, feel free to connect or follow on LinkedIn. That's my favorite platform. So,
Nihar Chhaya, Fortune 50 executive coach. Thank you so much today. It's been great.
Thank you, Michael. No, it's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks for listening to 97% Effective, where we skip happy talk and help you break through and ascend one hard truth at a time. Help others discover this show. Leave a review and rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you like what you heard, you can get free resources, including the first chapters of Michael's book, Get Promoted, on his website, www.changwenderoth.com. That's www.changwenderoth.com.